The psychiatrist looked intently at Edward and asked a question that no prescription, no medical protocol had been able to answer in 5 long years. "Who is that woman working in your house, Edward? Because she's accomplishing in 3 minutes what my medications haven't been able to achieve in 3 years." Edward Cartwright was speechless. The owner of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in California, the man who had poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into the best specialists in the country for his son, had absolutely no idea that the answer to everything had been cleaning his kitchen for the last 8 months, and this story shouldn't exist, and yet it does. And what you're about to hear in the next few minutes will make you question everything you believe about medicine, about love, and about who really holds the power to heal. If you've ever felt the world crumbling around you for no apparent reason, if your heart has ever pounded so hard you thought you were going to die, if you've ever felt absolute, unadulterated terror without knowing why, then this story is for you. Matthew Cartwright was 14 years old when his life changed forever. He was the best young swimmer in the state of California. He held records. He had trophies. He had a bright future that everyone could see. His coaches talked about the Olympics. His peers admired him. His father, Edward, was already planning how to support his professional career. On the day of the state championship, Matthew was in the locker room, preparing for the most important race of his life. Up until that point, he had trained for 2 years for this. He knew every stroke, at every breath, every second he needed to win. And then, it happened. Without any warning, without any logical reason, without anything to explain it. His heart began to race like it wanted to explode out of his chest. His hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The air disappeared. The walls closed in. The floor shifted beneath him, and an absolute certainty invaded every cell of his body. "I'm going to die." Those 3 words repeated in his mind for the next 23 minutes. 23 minutes that felt like 23 hours. 23 minutes that changed everything. When the paramedics arrived, Matthew was in the fetal position on the locker room floor. He hadn't swum. He hadn't competed. He hadn't won anything, except his first official diagnosis: severe panic disorder. But that was only the beginning. In the following 5 years, Matthew had over 600 panic attacks, 600 moments of absolute terror, 600 times his body told him he was going to die, when there was no real danger. He stopped swimming. He stopped going out. He stopped living. Edward did what any desperate father with unlimited resources would do. He hired the best. The first psychiatrist lasted 6 months, the second, 4, the third, 3, the fourth, 2. Each one had a new theory. Each one had a new medication. Each one had a new hope. That ended in the same place. Matthew continued to have attacks. 3, 4, sometimes 5 a week, and each attack plunged him further into a pit from which no one seemed to be able to pull him out. The irony was brutal. Edward Cartwright owned Pacific Pharmaceuticals, a company that manufactured precisely the medications that were supposed to help his son. He had access to any experimental drug. He had contacts in the best labs in the world. He had all the money necessary to buy any solution, but no pill worked. No chemical formula could touch what Matthew felt. And meanwhile, Edward worked 14 hours a day. Because that's how he knew how to deal with the pain. Working, producing, running away. If this story is touching something deep inside you, if you know someone who suffers from anxiety or panic attacks, or if you yourself have felt that inexplicable terror, hit like now. Not because I'm asking you to, but because this topic needs to stop being a taboo. And every like is a step towards that. 8 months before Dr. Wells asked that question that changed everything, a 47-year-old woman arrived at the Cartwrights' house looking for work. Her name was Hope. She didn't have an impressive resume. She didn't have references from prominent households. What she did have was an urgent need for work. and a look that the current housekeeper described as deeply sad, but inexplicably warm. She was hired as a housekeeper, nothing more. Cleaning, tidying, maintaining the 600-square-foot mansion in impeccable condition. That was her job. That was her only job. During the first few weeks, Hope did exactly that. She arrived at 7 in the morning. She cleaned. She tidied. She left at 4 in the afternoon. No drama, no problems, nothing out of the ordinary. But Hope noticed things. She noticed that there was a room on the second floor that always had the door closed. She noticed that sometimes from that room sounds came. Agitated breaths, suppressed sobs. And always, someone ran towards there when those sounds began. She noticed that Mr. Cartwright was almost never there, that Mrs. Cartwright had permanent dark circles under her eyes, that the other employees spoke in whispers about the son that no one saw, the son who was sick with something that no one could explain well. One day while cleaning the hallway on the second floor, the door to the closed room opened, and Hope saw Matthew for the first time. He was 19 years old, but looked like he was 40. His eyes were sunken, his skin was pale. His body moved as if he were carrying an invisible weight that bent him towards the ground. But what impacted her most was not how he looked. It was how he looked at her, with fear, with shame, with a silent apology for existing. Hope knew that look. She knew it too well, because 22 years ago, her own son had looked at her exactly the same way. Her son, Danny, who had also had panic attacks, who had also stopped living, who had also been treated by specialists who couldn't help him. Danny, who, at 22 years old, decided that he could no longer feel that terror and made a decision that shattered Hope forever. But there was something that Danny had told her before he left, something she never forgot. "Mom, the only thing that calmed me down was when you held my hands and breathed with me. Not the medications, not the doctors, you." And in that moment, seeing Matthew standing in that hallway, with the same look that her son had had, Hope knew that the universe had put her there, for a reason. She didn't say anything that day. She just nodded her head and kept cleaning. But she started to observe. She observed when Matthew had attacks. She observed how others reacted. I observed the medications they were giving him. I observed everything, and what I saw horrified me. When Matthew had an attack, everyone would run around. Everyone would shout. Everyone would panic right along with him. They'd shove pills down his throat. They'd leave him alone to calm down. They treated him like a bomb about to explode. No one, absolutely no one, simply stayed with him. No one touched him. No one breathed with him. No one communicated, not with words, but with their very presence, that he wasn't alone. 3 weeks after seeing Matthew for the first time, Hope was cleaning near his room when she heard the sounds she now knew so well, the rapid breathing, the sobs, the terror. The nurse on duty had gone to the restroom. There was no one else on the floor. Hope hesitated for a second, just 1 second. And then she opened the door. Matthew was on the floor, against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't seeing anything. His body was shaking as if he were in the middle of an earthquake that only he could feel. Hope didn't scream. She didn't run to get help. She didn't give him any pills. She did something that no one had done in 5 years. She sat down on the floor next to him, and she started to breathe. Slow, deep, audible. She didn't say anything. She didn't touch him. She just breathed. 1 male, 2, 3, 4, in, out, in, out. At first, Matthew didn't react. He was still trapped in his own personal hell. But after a minute, something changed. His eyes moved toward her, just a little, but they moved. And Hope did something else. She extended her hands, palms up. An invitation, not an imposition. Matthew looked at her hands, and after what seemed like an eternity, he placed his trembling hands on hers. Hope didn't squeeze them. She just held them. Steady, warm, present. And she kept breathing. In, out, in, out. 4 minutes later, Matthew's trembling stopped. 3 minutes after that, his breathing normalized. 2 minutes later, he did something he hadn't done during an attack in 5 years. He spoke. "Thank you," he whispered. Just that. One word. But a word that was worth more than all the prescriptions he had accumulated. When the nurse returned and saw the scene, she almost fainted. "What are you doing?" she asked Hope in an accusatory voice. Hope stood up, smoothed her blue uniform, and replied calmly, "What you all should have done a long time ago, being with him." That night, Hope couldn't sleep. She thought about Danny. She thought about all the times she had done the exact same thing with her son. She thought about how, after he was gone, she had sworn that if she ever had the opportunity to help someone else, she would. And now she had that opportunity. The next day, she arrived an hour early to work. She brought something in her bag, a new notebook and a blue rubber ball that had belonged to Danny. She started taking notes. Every time Matthew had an attack, she noted the time, the duration, what had happened before, what seemed to have triggered it. No one asked her to do this. No one even knew she was doing it. It was her secret, her silent mission. And whenever she could, when no one was around, she would approach Matthew during his moments of crisis. Always the same routine. Sit down, breathe, offer her hands, be present. No empty words of encouragement. No advice that he had already heard 1,000 times. Just presence. And something started to change. Matthew's attacks didn't disappear, but they started to become shorter. 10 minutes instead of 20. 7 instead of 10. 5 instead of 7. And something else changed. Matthew started to seek her out. At first, only with his eyes. When he felt an attack coming, his eyes would search for Hope in whatever room she was in. Then with his feet, he would walk to where she was cleaning. He would sit nearby. He wouldn't say anything. He would just be there. And Hope understood, because Danny had done the same thing. The presence of someone who isn't afraid of your fear is the most powerful medicine there is. Edward didn't notice any of this. He was too busy working, too busy running away from a problem he didn't know how to solve. But his wife, Karen, did notice. She noticed that Matthew seemed a little less withdrawn. She noticed that he was leaving his room more often. She noticed that the new housekeeper seemed to spend a lot of time near him. She didn't say anything. She didn't ask. She just observed with a mixture of hope and fear. And then came the day that changed everything. Dr. Wells, the 5th psychiatrist to treat Matthew, had a scheduled appointment at the house. He was a man of 58 years, with 30 years of experience, publications in the most prestigious journals, and a reputation for being the best in the country for difficult cases. He was also a man of pure science. He didn't believe in miracles. He didn't believe in magic solutions. He believed in data, in studies, in medical evidence. That day, Dr. Wells arrived to adjust Matthew's medication. The latest tests showed that the young man wasn't responding well to the current combination. He needed changes. He was in the study with Edward, reviewing the papers when they heard a sound they knew all too well. The rapid breathing, the onset of another attack. Edward jumped up. "It's Matthew. I'm going to call the nurse." But Dr. Wells stopped him. "Wait. I want to see how he handles this without immediate intervention. Sometimes observation gives us more information than any exam." They went upstairs. The sound was coming from the hallway on the 2nd floor, and what they saw froze Dr. Wells in his place. Matthew was sitting on the floor, against the wall, in the midst of what was clearly a severe attack. But he wasn't alone. The housekeeper was sitting in front of him, her hands holding Matthew's hands. Her body, completely still. Her breathing slow and audible. She wasn't saying anything. She was just breathing. She was just there. And Matthew was looking at her, with eyes that were still scared, but that held something else. Something that Dr. Wells hadn't seen in 5 years of treating that young man. Trust. The doctor didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes for Matthew's trembling to stop, for his breathing to normalize, for the terror in his eyes to turn into something resembling calm. 3 minutes. Dr. Wells had treated Matthew for 8 months. He had tried 7 different combinations of medications. He had used the most advanced techniques that existed. And never in 8 months had he managed to get Matthew's attack to end in 3 minutes. What happened next wasn't a scream or a dramatic scene. It was silence. Dr. Wells went downstairs, sat down in the study, and I waited for Edward to follow. When the millionaire arrived, still reeling from what he'd just witnessed, the psychiatrist asked the question that started it all. Who is that woman who works in your house? Because she's doing in 3 minutes what my medications haven't achieved in 3 years. Edward didn't know how to respond. His mind was still processing what he'd seen. His son, the very same one who spiraled into fits of terror that lasted 20-30 minutes, had calmed down in less time than it takes to brew a coffee. And it had been done with the help of the woman who cleaned his house. "It's Hope," he finally said. "She's our housekeeper. She's been with us for 8 months. Dr. Wells nodded slowly. His scientific mind was already formulating questions he had no answers for. His 30 years of experience told him that what he'd witnessed shouldn't be possible. And yet, he'd seen it. "I need to speak with her," the psychiatrist stated firmly. Edward hesitated. He wasn't sure if a housekeeper should be involved in his son's medical treatment, but something in Dr. Wells's gaze told him this wasn't a suggestion. "All right, I'll call her." When Hope entered the study, her hands were still damp from washing them after helping Matthew. Her navy uniform was immaculate. Her expression was serene. But her eyes held a deep sadness that Edward had never noticed before. "Please, have a seat," Dr. Wells offered. Hope glanced at Edward, seeking confirmation. He nodded. She sat on the edge of a chair, as if ready to get up at any moment. "What you did upstairs," the psychiatrist began, "isn't something you learn in any book. It isn't something they teach in any school. Where did you learn it?" Hope was silent for a moment, her hands clasped together in her lap. Her eyes filled with something that wasn't quite tears, but was dangerously close. "From my son," she replied softly. The silence in the room thickened. "Your son?" Dr. Wells repeated gently. His name was Danny. He also had panic attacks. They started when he was 17. We took him to doctors, but we didn't have money for the best ones. The medications they gave us didn't work well. I didn't know what to do." Hope paused. Her eyes were fixed on a point on the wall, but Edward knew she was seeing something very different. She was seeing the past. "One day, during a very bad attack, I did the only thing I could think of. I sat with him. I took his hands, and I breathed. Just that. I breathed. So he could follow my rhythm." "And it worked?" Dr. Wells inquired. For the first time, Hope smiled, but it was a broken smile. "It worked. It was the only thing that worked. For 5 years, every time Danny had an attack, I did the same thing. Sit, breathe, be there. No talking. No trying to fix it. Just be." Edward felt like he was eavesdropping on something private, something sacred, something he wasn't meant to hear, but he couldn't look away. "What happened to your son?" the psychiatrist asked with a soft voice. Hope lowered her gaze. "I worked nights at a factory. I couldn't be with him all the time. And one day, when I wasn't there, he had a very bad attack. And there was no one there to do what I did." No one to sit. No one to breathe with him. No one to just be there. The words hung in the air. Danny was 22. He decided he couldn't keep feeling that terror. And he left. He left, Edward repeated, not fully understanding. He died, Mr. Cartwright. My son died, because no one was with him when he needed it most. And I couldn't prevent it. Because I was working to pay for the medications that didn't work. Dr. Wells closed his eyes for a moment. He had seen a lot of pain in his career. He had lost patience. He had failed. But something in Hope's story struck him in a different way. That's why you do this with Matthew, he stated. It's not just kindness. It's because you recognize something. Hope finally looked him directly in the eyes. When I first saw your son, I saw Danny. The same look, the same fear, the same shame for existing. And I promised myself that I wasn't going to let another young man go through what my son went through, not if I could do something. Edward felt something break inside him. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something deeper. It was the realization that while he had been buying medications and hiring specialists, this woman had been doing the only work that really mattered: being present. How long have you been doing this with Matthew? Dr. Wells asked. 7 months, Hope responded, since shortly after I started working here. 7 months? Edward repeated, incredulous. 7 months and no one knew. Hope lowered her gaze. It's not my place to talk about these things, sir. I'm just the housekeeper. But I couldn't watch your son suffer. And do nothing. Not after what happened with Danny. Dr. Wells got up and walked to the window. His scientific mind was processing data that didn't fit into any model he knew, but there was something he did understand. What you do, he said without turning around, has a name in psychology. It's called co-regulation. It's the ability of one person to help another regulate their emotions through presence and synchronization. Hope didn't respond. She probably didn't know those technical terms. It's one of the most powerful tools there is for panic disorder, the psychiatrist continued. But it almost never works because it requires something that no medication can give. What's that? Edward asked. Total presence, without fear, without judgment, without the need to fix anything, just being. And that, Mr. Cartwright, is exactly what your housekeeper has been doing with your son for 7 months, without anyone asking her to, without anyone paying her extra, without anyone even knowing. Edward sank back into his chair. The weight of what he was hearing was too much. Why didn't you say anything? He asked Hope. Why didn't you tell us? She looked at him with surprise, as if the question made no sense. Because no one asked me where, and because you have doctors and you have money, where you have everything. I'm just a woman who cleans houses. Who was going to listen to me? If you, who are listening to this, have ever felt that you don't matter, that your voice doesn't count, that what you do is worthless, listen to me carefully. Sometimes the people who change lives the most are exactly the ones the world considers invisible. If you know someone like that, send them this video now, because they need to know that their presence matters more than they imagine. Dr. Wells returned to his chair. He looked at his notes. He looked at Hope. I look at Edward. I'm going to be very honest with you both, he said. In 30 years of practice, I've treated thousands of patients with panic disorder. I've published studies. I've developed protocols. I've prescribed every medication that exists. He paused. And never, in my entire career, have I seen someone do what this woman does. What she has can't be prescribed. It can't be bought. It can't be learned at a university. It's something that comes from a very deep place, and your son needs it more than any pill I can give him. Edward felt like the world was turning upside down. He, who had dedicated his life to the pharmaceutical industry. He, who believed that everything had a chemical solution. He, who had spent hundreds of thousands on the best treatments, and the answer had been cleaning his kitchen. What are you suggesting, Doctor? He finally asked. Dr. Wells looked at Hope. I suggest that this woman stop being just your housekeeper. I suggest she be officially part of Matthew's care team. not to replace the medical treatment, to complement it with something that no medication can provide. Hope shook her head. I'm not a nurse. I don't have any training. I don't know anything about medicine. You don't need to know about medicine, the psychiatrist replied. You need to know about presence. And that, ma'am, you know better than any professional I've met in my life. Edward stood up. Hope, he said, for the first time using her name directly. How much do we pay you per month? 8,000 pesos, sir. From today, you earn 20,000. And your job is no longer cleaning this house. Your job is to be with my son. Hope looked at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. But, sir, I don't. My son almost left like yours, Edward interrupted. Not because he wanted to, but because there was no one who did what you do. You've given him in 7 months what I couldn't give him in 5 years. And that's priceless. The tears that Hope had held back throughout the conversation finally began to fall. I don't want money, she said. I just want Matthew to be well. Because if he's well, then Danny didn't die in vain. Then everything I learned taking care of him served a purpose. Dr. Wells approached her. Mrs. Hope, what you have is a gift born from the greatest pain a mother can feel, and that gift is saving a young man who was lost. Accept the recognition, not for yourself, for Danny, because this is exactly what he would have wanted. Hope looked at the psychiatrist, she looked at Edward, and finally, she nodded. I will, she said, but with one condition. What is it? That no one tells Matthew that I'm here for him, that he keeps thinking I'm the housekeeper who cleans, because the moment he knows I'm here as his caregiver, he's going to feel like he's a burden. And that feeling is exactly what triggers his attacks. Dr. Wells smiled for the first time since he had arrived. Ma'am, you've just shown more understanding of the psychology of panic than many of my colleagues with doctorates. Deal. And so began a new stage. Hope continued to arrive at 7 in the morning. She continued to wear her blue uniform. She continued to clean, tidy, and maintain the house. But now, her real job was something else. She kept a notebook where she wrote everything down. Every attack of Matthew's, the time, the duration, what had happened before, what seemed to work, what didn't. She brought more things from her house. A blue rubber ball that had belonged to Danny, a voice recorder, a book of breathing techniques that she had found in a public library years ago. And most importantly, she brought her presence. Every day, no matter what. Hope spent at least 2 hours near Matthew. Not always talking. Sometimes just being in the same room, reading, cleaning, existing. Because she had learned with Danny that people with panic need to know that someone is there, not when they have an attack, always, all the time. They need that certainty like they need air. And Matthew started to change, not overnight, not like an instant miracle. But he changed. His attacks went down from 4 per week to 3, then to 2, then some weeks only 1. And when he had attacks, they lasted less time, much less time, because now he had something he had never had before. He had someone who wasn't afraid of his fear. 3 months after the conversation with Dr. Wells, something happened that changed everything again. Matthew was in his room. It was night. Hope had already gone home, and he felt an attack coming. The familiar knot in his chest, the tingling in his hands, the sensation that the air was disappearing. But this time, Matthew did something different. Instead of letting himself be swept away by the panic, he closed his eyes and thought of Hope. He thought of her breathing, how it was always slow, constant, like the waves of the ocean. And he started to breathe the same way, in, out, in, out. His hand searched for the blue rubber ball that she had left him, the same one that had belonged to Danny. And as he squeezed it, he imagined that Hope was there, sitting in front of him, with her hands 8 minutes later, the attack passed. Without anyone, without emergency medication, without a complete crisis. For the first time in 5 years, Matthew had managed an attack alone. When Hope arrived the next day, he was waiting for her in the kitchen. "Something happened last night," he said. Hope looked at him with immediate concern. Her eyes searched for signs of harm. "I had an attack, but I managed it. Alone. I thought of you. I breathed like you taught me. And it passed." Hope's eyes filled with tears. But this time they weren't tears of sadness. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Matthew replied. "We did it. If some of the things I'm telling you are stirring something deep inside you, if you know someone who struggles with anxiety or panic, or if you yourself have felt that terror that seems to have no solution, listen carefully. This story exists to remind you that the cure doesn't always come in a pill. Sometimes it comes in the form of presence, of someone who is simply there." Dr. Wells couldn't believe the reports he was receiving. The frequency of Matthew's attacks had dropped from 4 per week to 1 every 10 days. The average duration had gone from 25 minutes to less than 10. And for the first time in 5 years, the young man was showing signs of wanting to reintegrate into life. He had started to leave his room of his own volition. He had asked to see an old friend. He had mentioned very tenuously the possibility of going back to swimming. On his next visit to the house, the psychiatrist asked to see Hope alone. "I need to understand something," he said. "I've been treating patients for 30 years. I've seen it all. But I've never seen such rapid improvement in such a severe case. What exactly is it that you do?" Hope paused for a moment before answering. "I don't do anything special, doctor," she said softly. "I'm just there. When he's afraid, I don't run. When he trembles, I don't panic. When he feels like he's going to die, I show him with my body that he isn't going to die, because I'm calm, and if I'm calm, then the danger can't be real." Dr. Wells nodded slowly. "That's exactly co-regulation. The nervous system of a calm person can calm the nervous system of someone in panic, but it requires something that almost no one can do." "What's that?" Hope inquired, not being afraid of the other person's fear. Most people, when they see someone in panic, they panic too. It's contagious, but you don't. You remain like a rock, and that allows Matthew to use your calm as an anchor. Hope lowered her gaze. "I learned with Danny. At first, I also got scared when he had attacks. I ran. I cried. I told him to calm down, as if that was something he could control, but that only made it worse." "What changed?" Dr. Wells inquired. "One day, after a very severe attack, Danny told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'Mom, when you get scared, I get more scared, because if you, who are my mom, are afraid, then the danger must be real.'" Hope paused. Her eyes looked into the past. "That day, I decided that I would never show him fear again, no matter what happened, no matter how terrified I was inside. On the outside, I was going to be his rock, his safe place." And it worked. It worked for 5 years. Every time I did that, it worked. The problem was, I couldn't be with him all the time. I had to work, I had to pay bills, and the day I wasn't there, her voice broke. Dr. Wells gave her a moment. "Mrs. Hope, what you discovered by instinct is something that science is just starting to understand. The power of human presence to regulate the nervous system. You don't have a degree, but you have something more valuable. You have experience transformed into wisdom." Hope looked at him. "Then why don't doctors teach this to people? Why is it all pills and more pills?" The psychiatrist sighed. "Because pills can be sold, because pills are easier to measure, Because the medical system doesn't know how to prescribe presence. There's no billing code for being with someone without fear. It's unfair. It's reality. But cases like yours and Matthew's are changing that, little by little. There are studies now, research, people who are starting to understand that the human brain wasn't designed to heal alone. It was designed to heal in connection. Hope nodded. My son taught me that. With his life. And with his death. 4 months later, Edward came home early, not because something bad had happened, but because something good was happening. Matthew had sent him a text, a message that Edward read 3 times to make sure it was real. Dad, I'm going to go to the club pool, just to see. Not to swim yet, but I want to see. Edward almost crashed the car out of excitement. His son hadn't set foot near a pool in 5 years. He hadn't even wanted to see the water. Every time someone mentioned swimming, his eyes would go blank, and he would lock himself in his room. And now he wanted to go see. When he got home, he found Matthew in the entryway, dressed in normal clothes, not pajamas, normal clothes. And next to him, Hope, in her blue uniform, with her bag where she carried the notebook, the stress ball, and everything else. Can I go? Hope asked, looking at Edward. Edward almost laughed at the question. Of course you can go. You go where my son goes. The club was 15 minutes from the house during the entire drive. Hope sat in the back seat next to Matthew. They didn't speak. She was just there. Her presence was enough. When they arrived, and Matthew saw the pool, he stopped. Edward held his breath. Hope didn't move. The water sparkled under the sun. It smelled of chlorine. The sound of other swimmers' strokes filled the air. Matthew closed his eyes, and Edward saw something that destroyed him and rebuilt him at the same time. He saw his son breathe, slow, deep, exactly as Hope had taught him. He saw his hands search for the stress ball in his pocket. He saw his body trembling slightly, but not collapsing. And he saw Hope, 3 steps away, breathing at the same rhythm, like a mirror, like an anchor, like a beacon in the storm. 2 minutes passed, 3, 4. And then Matthew opened his eyes. I'm not going to swim today, he said, but I'm going to come back, and someday, I'm going to get in the water. Edward couldn't contain himself. He hugged his son like he hadn't hugged him in years, as if he wanted to recover all the time lost in that single moment. Thank you, he whispered to Matthew. But Matthew shook his head. Don't thank me, Dad. Thank her. And he pointed to Hope, the woman who cleaned his house, the woman who earned minimum wage, the woman who had lost her own son and had transformed that pain into a gift, the woman who had done what hundreds of thousands of dollars in treatments couldn't do. Edward approached Hope, and for the first time, the millionaire who had built a pharmaceutical empire knelt before a housekeeper. I don't know how to repay you for what you've done, he said, his voice breaking. Hope looked at him with tenderness. You already paid me, sir. You paid me by letting me be with your son. You paid me by giving me the opportunity to do what I couldn't do with Danny. But I want to do more. I want you to never have to worry about money. I want you to have a house. I want you to... Hope stopped him, raising a hand. Mr. Cartwright, all I want is to keep coming here every day. Keep seeing Matthew improve. Keep knowing that what I learned with my son is serving a purpose. She paused. And perhaps, if you really want to help, you could do something bigger. What? Edward asked. Train other people, teach them what I know, so that other young people like Matthew don't have to wait for someone like me to appear by chance. Edward remained silent. His entrepreneurial mind was already processing the idea, a program, a protocol, something that could scale, something that could help thousands of people. And the irony was that it would come from the same company that manufactured the medications that hadn't worked. I'm going to do it, he said finally. I promise you." Hope smiled. Then Danny didn't die in vain. In a year after that day at the pool, many things had changed. Matthew had returned to swimming, not competitively though. He no longer cared about winning medals or breaking records, but he swam 3 times a week, for pleasure, for healing, for the simple joy of feeling the water. His panic attacks hadn't disappeared completely. He still had one every 3 or 4 weeks. But now, he knew how to manage them. He knew he wasn't going to die. He knew they would pass. And that, more than any medication, had given him his life back. His medication had been reduced by 60%. Dr. Wells had documented the entire case and was writing an article for a medical journal. An article that spoke of co-regulation, of presence, of what he called invisible medicine. Edward had kept his promise. Pacific Pharmaceuticals had launched a pilot program. 100 people trained in the techniques that Hope had developed with Danny and perfected with Matthew. 100 people who now worked as companions to patients with anxiety disorders. The program was called Project Presence, and Hope was its director. She, who had never finished high school. She, who had worked as a housekeeper her entire life. She, who had lost her son and turned that pain into purpose. Now she was teaching doctors and nurses what no university had taught them, the power of simply being there. Matthew insisted on knowing Danny's entire story. One day, sitting next to Hope in the garden of the mansion, he asked her to tell him everything, every detail, every moment, every memory, and Hope did. She told him of a boy who loved the stars and dreamed of being an astronomer, of a teenager who one day started having attacks that no one understood, of years of struggle, of doctors, of medications that didn't work. She told him of the nights she spent sitting next to him, breathing, holding him when his world was falling apart. She told him of the night she wasn't there, and of the following morning. Matthew wept, not for himself, for Danny, for that young man he never knew, but who, somehow, had saved his life from beyond. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "What are you sorry for?" Hope asked. "For having survived when he couldn't." Hope took his hands, exactly as she did during the attacks. But this time, it wasn't to calm him. It was to connect. "Matthew, listen to me carefully. Danny didn't die so that you would feel guilt. Danny died because I couldn't be with him when he needed me most. But his death taught me something that is now saving lives. Your life. And the lives of all the people that Project Presence is going to help." She paused. "Your survival isn't a betrayal of Danny. It's his legacy. Every day that you live well, every attack that you manage, every moment that you are present for yourself, that is Danny living through you." Matthew looked at her. "How can you not hate me? I have everything he didn't have. Money, access to the best doctors, and most importantly, I have you." Hope smiled. "I don't hate you because hating you would be hating the only good thing that came out of losing my son. You are the proof that his suffering served a purpose. You are the reason I get up every morning." Matthew said nothing. He just hugged her, and in that embrace, 2 stories came together. The story of the son who left, and the story of the son who stayed. The story of the pain that destroys and the pain that heals. The story of death, and the story of life. If you've made it this far, if this story has stirred something deep within you, I need to ask you something. It's not a like. It's not a subscription. It's something more important. Think of someone in your life who is struggling with something that seems to have no solution. Someone with anxiety, with depression, with fear. Someone who feels alone in their battle. And be their hope. You don't need to be a doctor. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be there. Breathe with them. Don't run from their pain. Be their rock. Because sometimes, the most powerful cure doesn't come in a pill. It comes in the form of presence. Doctor. Wells included a special note at the end of his article. The note read as follows: "In 30 years of psychiatric practice, I have seen the power of medication. I have seen how it can stabilize, how it can calm, how it can restore functionality to people who had lost it. I do not deny its importance, but I have also seen its limitations. And in the case of Matthew Cartwright, I saw something that science is only beginning to understand. I saw how the presence of a woman with no degree, no training, no technical knowledge, achieved what years of pharmacological treatment could not. I don't write this to discredit medicine. I write this to expand it, to remind my colleagues that the human being is not just a brain that needs the correct chemistry. It is a social being that needs connection. And sometimes, the best medicine is simply someone who isn't afraid of our fear." 3 years later, Matthew did something that no one had thought would be possible. He swam in a competition. Not at the state level, not seeking records, just a local club competition. Nothing important in the grand scheme of things, but for him, it was everything. When he arrived at the pool that day, his heart was beating fast. His hands were sweating. The ghost of the attack from 8 years ago was there, whispering to him that it was going to happen again. But Hope was also there, sitting in the stands, with her notebook in her lap, with the blue rubber ball that Matthew had now returned to her, because he no longer needed it. And when Matthew stood on the starting block, he looked towards her. Hope didn't make any signal. She didn't say anything. She just breathed, slowly, deeply, visibly. And Matthew breathed with her. In. Tasut Kribin Basest. The starting gun fired. Matthew dove into the water, and he swam. He didn't win. He finished 4th out of 6, a mediocre result for what had been the best young swimmer in the state. But when he got out of the water, he had a smile that he hadn't had in 8 years, just because he hadn't won a race. He had won something much bigger. He had won the battle against his own fear. Edward was in the stands, crying like he hadn't cried since he was a child. Carmen was next to him, clinging to his arm, unable to believe what she was seeing. And Hope was there, quiet, serene, with silent tears falling down her cheeks. Tears for Matthew, tears for Danny, tears for all the years of pain that had finally found their purpose. That night, at the Cartwright mansion, there was a celebration. But it wasn't a celebration of victory. It was a celebration of survival. Matthew stood in front of all the guests and said something that no one expected. 3 years ago, I didn't want to live. Not in the dramatic way you might be thinking, but I didn't want to. Each day was a battle I was losing. Each panic attack convinced me more and more that the world would be better off without me. The room fell silent. And then Hope arrived. A woman who had lost her own son to the same thing I was feeling. A woman who had every reason in the world to run from the pain. But instead she sat with me, breathed with me. She taught me that I wasn't alone. Matthew looked at Hope. You didn't save me because you had all the answers. You saved me because you were there. And today, I'm alive because someone had the courage not to run from my fear. Hope stood up and walked towards him. I don't need any medals, she said. I don't need any recognition. I just needed to know that Danny didn't die in vain. And every time I see you live, I know it. I know it with all my heart. Matthew embraced her. And in that embrace were 2 mothers. The one who had brought him into the world, and the one who had taught him to want to stay in it. This story shouldn't even exist. A son who was lost. A son who was found. A mother who lost everything and found a new purpose. A father who had everything and discovered he was missing the only thing that mattered. A psychiatrist who admitted his medications weren't enough. A pharmaceutical company that started prescribing presents. A young man who swam again after thinking he never could. And a housekeeper who changed everything. If you don't believe miracles exist, you haven't met a Hope. If you think money buys everything, you haven't seen a millionaire kneeling before a woman who earns minimum wage. If you think doctors have all the answers, You haven't heard a psychiatrist admit that a cleaning lady knows more than he does. And if you think you're alone in your battle, you need to know something. Somewhere out there, there's a hope waiting for you. Maybe it's someone you already know. Maybe it's someone you haven't met yet. Maybe it's you yourself for someone else. But it exists. The presence you need exists. You just have to let it in. Where are they now? Matthew is 23 years old. He's studying psychology at UCLA. He wants to become a therapist specializing in anxiety disorders. He says he wants to be for others what hope was for him. Edward has reduced his workday to 8 hours. He dedicates his afternoons to being with his family and personally overseeing Project Presence. He says that for the first time in his life, he feels like his money is doing something that really matters. Dr. Wells retired but continues to lecture on co-regulation and the importance of presence in psychiatric treatment. His article on Matthew's case has been cited in over 200 studies. Project Presence has trained over 2,000 people in 3 years. It's estimated that they've helped over 15,000 patients with anxiety disorders across the United States. And Hope. Hope still arrives at 7 in the morning. She still wears her blue uniform. She still sits with Matthew when he needs it, although he almost never does anymore. But now she also travels, gives talks, trains others. She tells Danny's story so that his death has meaning, and every night before she goes to sleep she talks to her son. I did it, Danny. What I couldn't do for you, I'm doing for others. Every life I save is yours. Every person who learns not to run from fear does it for you. I don't know if Danny can hear her. I don't know if there's anything after this life. But what I do know is that his legacy is alive. In Matthew. In the 2,000 people trained. In the 15,000 patients helped. In every conscious breath someone takes when they feel the panic coming. That's the story of how a housekeeper did what the best medications in the world couldn't. Not with chemical formulas. Not with advanced techniques. Not with anything you can buy. With presence or with love. With the decision not to run from another human being's fear. If this story touched you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it, not for me. For all the Matthews out there waiting for their hope, and if you are the one who's struggling, if you are the one who feels like the world is collapsing, listen closely. You don't need someone who has all the answers. You just need someone who isn't afraid of your fear. Find that person, or become that person for yourself, because the most powerful cure that exists doesn't come in a pill. It comes in the form of presence, and that presence can be yours. There's something else I need to tell you before I finish. 2 years after Matthew swam again, he received a letter. The letter came from a mother in Seattle. Her name was Sarah. She had a 16-year-old son who had suffered from panic attacks since he was 12. Sarah had seen an interview with Hope on television. She had heard the story of Danny and Matthew, and something in her had broken and been rebuilt at the same time. She wanted to know if Project Presence could help her son. Matthew read the letter 3 times, and then he did something that surprised everyone. I want to go personally, he said. Hope looked at him with concern. Are you sure? Seattle is far, and you've never done anything like this. Precisely because of that, I need to do it. I know what that kid is feeling. I know what his mom is going through. And I know that if someone had come to me 8 years ago and told me it was possible to get out of this, my life would have changed much sooner. Edward offered to pay for everything. Hope insisted on accompanying him. Dr. Wells gave the materials to work with the young man. And so Matthew Cartwright, the millionaire's son who once couldn't even leave his room, traveled to Seattle to meet a boy who was where he had been. His name was Kevin. He was 16 years old, sunken eyes, pale skin. The same look Matthew had had, the same shame for existing. When they met, Matthew didn't say anything for a long moment. He just sat across from him and breathed, slowly, deeply, audibly. Kevin looked at him confused at first, but little by little, without realizing it, he started breathing the same way. In, out, in, Out. After 5 minutes, Matthew finally spoke. I know what you're feeling. I know you think no one can understand. I know you think you're going to die every time an attack comes. I know you're ashamed to exist. Kevin lowered his gaze. How do you know? Because I was you. 8 years ago, I was exactly you. And someone taught me that I didn't have to face this alone. Someone taught me to breathe. Someone sat with me when everyone else ran. And that someone saved my life. Who? A housekeeper, who had lost her own son to the same thing we were feeling. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have formal training. She only had the experience of pain, transformed into wisdom. Edward looked up, and it worked. Matthew smiled. I'm here. I'm breathing. I'm alive. I even swam again. So yes, it worked. Susan, Edward's mother, stood in the doorway, silently crying. Hope went to her. He's going to be okay, she said. Not overnight. Not like some instant miracle. But he is going to be okay, because now he has something he needs. What's that? Someone who isn't afraid of his fear. That visit lasted 3 days. Matthew taught Edward the techniques that Hope had taught him. Hope taught Susan what she'd learned from Danny. Dr. Wells, who joined via video call, adjusted the young man's medication. When they left, Edward hugged them both. Thank you, he said. For the first time in 4 years, I feel like someone understands me. You don't have to thank us, Matthew responded. You just have to make a promise. What's that? That when you're better, you're going to do the same for someone else. You're going to go sit with someone who is where you are now. You're going to breathe with them. You're going to show them. They aren't alone. Edward nodded. I promise. That's the chain that Hope started. Without even knowing it. Danny taught his mother. His mother taught Matthew. Matthew taught Edward. And Edward, a year later, traveled to San Diego to meet a 14-year-old girl who was suffering from the same thing. The chain keeps growing. Not because anyone has the perfect answers, not because there's a magic pill, not because doctors have discovered the definitive cure, but because people are learning not to run from the fear of others. Dr. Wells included this in the latest edition of his article. He wrote that co-regulation isn't just a clinical technique. It's a way of being in the world. It's the decision to remain present when everything in us wants to flee. It's the courage to hold someone in their darkest moment without trying to fix them. And he wrote something else. He wrote that if modern medicine truly wants to heal people, not just treat them, it needs to understand something fundamental. The human being wasn't designed to heal alone. It was designed to heal in connection. And sometimes, the most powerful connection comes from the least expected people. From a housekeeper who lost her son. From a young man who spent 5 years locked in his room. From a mother who didn't know what to do, but decided to stay. That's the invisible medicine. That's what pills can't give. That's what this story is telling you. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what degrees you have. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You can be the presence someone needs. You just have to decide, not to run, that's all. And that's all you need. Thank you for listening to the end. This story exists because someone decided to tell it. And now, it exists in you. Keep it alive. Share it. And if you can, be someone's hope. Because in a world full of pills, sometimes the best medicine is simply being there.